What if I told you there was a source for all of Dead by Daylight's issues? What if I told you that there was a core connection between all the things that get under your skin while playing the game? What if I told you that there was a patient zero for Dead by Daylight's balance issues and bugs, and curing that patient could potentially fix everything you hate about playing Dead by Daylight? Would you believe me? Would you believe that there was a way to fix the game and all the flaws it has? Well, I'm not even sure I would believe that personally, but that doesn't mean it's a Herculean task that can't be tackled in a meaningful way. So, that being said, what is this source, this core connection, the patient zero of Dead by Daylight's numerous flaws? Well, that would be none other than Behavior Interactive, the puppet master behind DBD's development and, as a result, DBD's problems, which, as I'm sure you're aware, are as impressive in their quantity as they are in sheer magnitude. But if you play Dead by Daylight at all, I'm sure you're not ignorant of how broken the game is, both in balance and just generally not being built on a steady foundation. With every new update released, it feels like the game just gets more and more broken. Behavior can't update one thing without breaking something completely unrelated. They'll update the HUD for some reason, only to shatter the twins' code for the billionth time or turn Deathslinger's hitbox into sludge for no reason whatsoever. Things that should be completely unrelated at a glance, but are somehow tied together by the spaghetti code that DBD is seemingly built on. However, this doesn't just stop at bugs, obviously. Things like the designs of killers and perks, the game's general balance, how maps are put together, and so many other things can be just as problematic as the issues that are completely unintentional. This isn't an opinion that's been diabolically concocted by yours truly to smear Behavior. This is an issue that's extremely prevalent if you play Dead by Daylight for longer than 5 minutes. An issue that's as embedded into the game as much as something like killers and survivors are. Fact of the matter is, the biggest threat to Dead by Daylight's longevity isn't related to some asymmetrical competitor coming out of nowhere and taking the spotlight. Instead, it's Behavior, the people that built the game from the ground up. Their choices and the way they choose to tackle long-standing issues continuously puts the game in a bad spot over and over again. Today, folks, we're going to be talking about Behavior, Dead by Daylight's biggest threat. Time and time again, Behavior puts me in a spot where I feel uncomfortable not talking about the current issues affecting the game. I'll have one video planned out only to have Behavior kick down my door and take a metaphorical shit on my carpet. I can either choose to ignore the nasty little gift they just left in my room, or I can lock in and deal with it. I choose the latter. Whether it's the slugging and tunneling changes which have been reverted again, or it's the pallet density changes that have been also reverted, I feel an obligation to voice my concerns about current issues, and typically I do if I think I have something to add. However, today I want to tackle that topic differently. Sure, I could talk about the recent pallet changes that just inverted an issue that killers were having, thus turning it into a survivor issue. I could talk about how this most recent mid-chapter is a massive disappointment because it gave us almost nothing interesting to look forward to. I could talk about the health chapter and how it pushed back fun new content from coming to the game, with the promise that the game would become more stable, only to be a massive letdown. Even so, I don't want to. Instead, I want to focus on the core cause behind those problems, the bigger fish in the lake in comparison to the smaller fish that tend to get the brunt of the attention. That bigger fish being, well, Behavior. Let me make this clear, this is not a hate video. I don't want anyone going out of their way to harass the game's developers, anyone connected to the game in any way, or anyone at all now that I think about it. I get that it's easy to look at Behavior as a faceless corporate entity and hate the choices they make. That's fine. Unfortunately though, when it becomes less about the company and more about particular people, well, that heads into a nasty territory that should probably be avoided like the plague. Sure, I get that particular developers or people connected to the company in one way or another might say some pretty silly things occasionally, as we have seen that happen before, but those incidents are few and far between. Nothing good will ever come from targeting one person in particular, trust me. Each and every individual you see that works on Dead by Daylight, whether on their live streams or not, are just people. People that make mistakes just as easily as we do. People that are under corporate deadlines and are stressed to rush things out of the door. Those people's lives are already difficult enough. They don't deserve to be harassed and get death threats because Hattie didn't get a new skin this month. You just look like an asshole if you do that. So I don't want anyone using this video as a way to harass people who they think are to blame for the game's faults, as I think that's a really terrible thing to do. Instead, I want to take a look at Behavior's decision making as a whole in order to pinpoint exactly where they come up short with their development of the game. From the start, Dead by Daylight was more of a passion project than anything else, a fun little tribute to the horror genre in its entirety, where you'd be put in the shoes of either a generic slasher with the goal of killing survivors, or a survivor with the goal of escaping said slasher, both taking place on a variety of different maps with different perks and add-ons you could use to spice up that core gameplay. It was simple for the most part. It was fun for the most part. It was extremely buggy and an unbalanced mess, which people were very quick to pick up on. It was almost immediately apparent that behavior was a bit out of their depth as soon as the game came out, as it sold over 1 million copies in its first 2 months, which is definitely nothing to sneeze at. Even while being under the supervision of Starbreeze Studios, it was very clear that the success of Dead by Daylight was going to be a game changer for Behavior Interactive, as it didn't take them long to buy the publishing rights from Starbreeze during 2017 to 2018 for about $16 million, giving them full creative control of the game. From there, Behavior had to make a choice. They could either build Dead by Daylight on a better foundation and risk losing players due to a lack of new content, or they could keep adding new content and build onto the already unstable foundation and just hope that it wouldn't snap under the pressure. With the state the game is in now, I'm sure you're well aware of which one they picked. It wasn't a great position for them to be in, and it didn't take long for cracks to start forming. Whether you think this is due to inexperience, incompetency, or a lack of manpower, Dead by Daylight bugs started popping up like a bloody game of whack-a-mole. One bug would get stomped out only for 2 more to show up in its wake. However, Behavior now had full creative control and a pretty steady player base. With some time and more money, maybe they could iron out the issues and turn Dead by Daylight into an all-around good experience. Right? Unfortunately for us, Behavior didn't really do that. Dead by Daylight was a skyscraper built on top of a sinkhole, and the more they added onto that skyscraper, the deeper the building would sink. Look, I'm not gonna pretend to know what's going on behind the scenes in depth, but as an outside observer, it's clear that DBD is a very unstable game. Things get broken super easily, there are countless animation bugs that have been around forever, some perks and killers just don't work like they should, and so many other problems. Each new update that releases these days comes out with the laundry list of bug fixes, only a quarter of which ever seem to actually be fixes. So what's going on here? Does Behavior just not care about the health of their game? Do they not want to put in the effort to fix the bugs that have been in the game for ages? Well, I don't think that's it. Not quite. I really do think it's an issue as simple as Behavior just having to work with a fractured base and struggling to fix one thing without breaking the other. Is that on them? Well, yeah, at the end of the day, Behavior is responsible for DBD, and I'm not gonna sit here and coddle them while pretending it's fine that the game is such a buggy mess. It's pretty unacceptable. Like I said, I don't want to make assumptions about the people working on the game and how efficient they are at doing their jobs, as there would be no point to that. However, what I do know is that the amount of bugs in the game is pretty embarrassing, and as embarrassing as it is for me to play such a buggy game, I'm sure it's miles worse to be working on such a buggy game. I'm not sure how much of that is due to corporate meddling and whatnot, but when you say you're going to be working on the health of the game to fix some core issues and push back other content to do it, I expect that work to show results, which I'm sure you guys know it really hasn't. The game is still as buggy as it was back then, and it feels pointless to focus on fixing bugs when the next chapter release just adds 20 more to the game. I understand that no game is going to be flawless, but at a point, it just gets to be too much. So how should Behavior go about fixing this? Well, like I said, the foundation that Behavior has built DBD on is fundamentally broken. It's the only reason I can point to as to why things get bugged so easily despite not being touched most of the time. The only way Behavior can actually get around to fixing that would be dismantling that cracked base and building it better, stronger, more supportive of the massive scope that DBD has now. With that change, maybe we could get more interesting killer powers, maybe load times wouldn't be so long, or maybe we could get super fun game modes and events that completely shake up the core gameplay. The problem is that would take a lot of time and a lot of work, and it isn't a surefire thing that it wouldn't make the game more broken in the process. Nevertheless, I think the possible pros outweigh the possible cons by a landslide. The fact of the matter is, if DBD is going to keep growing and getting more popular, the game has to grow with it, and the only way it can do that safely is if it has the support it needs to do so. Right now, it doesn't have that, and it really makes DBD feel like a mess to play most of the time. Bugs are infuriating to see, especially when they directly interfere with the match's outcome, and Behavior is really going to have to think about taking drastic measures if they actually want to fix those issues. On the other hand, I have much less sympathy when it comes to choices Behavior makes in comparison to unintentional bugs that were never intended to be there. Bugs, most of the time, can be brushed off, especially when they're not super common, but what can't be brushed off as easily, and also leads to people being much angrier at Behavior, is their choices regarding the balance of the game, most of which are pretty baffling. I said I wasn't going to dive into individual updates, and I won't, but I want to mention that the slugging and tunneling changes are a prime example of this issue. So are the palette changes we've seen recently. On one end, I understand that Behavior is in a tough spot. Asymmetrical games just aren't easy to balance. It's as simple as that. It's one of the main reasons that asymmetrical games always tend to fail, regardless of the license and popularity. It's so easy for one side to feel underpowered, and if people don't want to play one side, the game fails. For an asymmetrical game, you have to strike a healthy balance of both sides feeling fun and strong to play, and if not, the game dies. Killer Clowns, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Video Horror Society, Home Sweet Home Survive, Friday the 13th, Evolve, all of these games had that problem, and if I'm going to throw Behavior a bone at all during this video, it'll be this. I think Behavior has been the closest to striking that balance than any other developer who has tackled this issue, which is really saying something. However, the only reason I say that is because we've been in such a tug of war between both sides of the game for so long that saying the game is favored to one side in particular ages like milk, just in half a year typically. All of a sudden, there are 30 million pallets on a map. The next day, those pallets are completely and totally terrible. This problem extends to killers too. One day, a killer will be super strong, and then they end up being overly nerfed in order to appease the other half of the player base, making that killer miserable to play, and then nobody wants to play that killer. Same goes for perks. One moment a perk is good, the next patch it's useless and nobody wants to run it. Behavior tends to overcorrect a lot, and like my favorite Florida man likes to say, behavior goes from one extreme to the other, completely lacking the ability to find that middle ground, which really shouldn't be as hard to locate as they're making it out to be. The problem is, at a glance, it doesn't seem like Behavior knows their own game at all, at least not entirely. Anybody who plays Dead by Daylight will tell you that solo queue typically sucks to play, and as a result, Survivor is often a miserable role to queue into if you're not grouping up with friends. However, what ends up happening is Behavior sees complaints about how survivors feel, and instead of focusing on the core issue that is solo queue teammates being really bad and a severe lack of information, they instead throw hundreds of pallets on maps and then give each other a pat on the back while calling it a day. Not only did they miss the actual issue going on, but they made the game worse to play for one role by a mile. Then when people start groaning about how miserable killers feel to play, they throw up their hands in confusion because, in their eyes, they fixed the problem, not understanding that they missed the mark by an embarrassing degree. I, for one, don't think Behavior is completely inept, and I actually really respect them for trying to fix things like aggressive slugging and needless tunneling. But the issue is that you can't attempt to fix those issues if you don't understand why they're even there to begin with. This is why people really don't have much faith in Behavior to make the best choices for their game, and instead are often doom posting about the state of the game once a day. Once players are in that mindset where they feel like every choice Behavior makes is terrible, then the small things that really aren't an issue get blown out of proportion because they get thrown onto the pile of annoying things that just gets higher and higher with every passing day. As a result, it's hard to get excited about new things until something really impressive comes out, like a second Stranger Things chapter, and then it feels like Behavior is relying on licenses to do all the heavy lifting for them and fix the game for them. Due to how slow Behavior is at patching long-standing problems, as well as their lack of transparency with the player base, which I will say they have gotten better at, I'll give them that, it's easy to see why players on both sides get really frustrated, because it feels like they aren't being listened to in a timely manner, and feels more like Behavior is just trying to pump out new skins for Sable and more licensed content to make a quick buck instead of focusing on the game's long-term health. But when Behavior does actually try to fix problems that have been nagging for a while, it often feels more like they're just trying to keep everyone quiet. It feels more reactive instead of proactive, like they only fix these issues when they become so prevalent that they simply can't ignore them anymore. This is why most of the time the community feels extremely negative towards the health of the game. Even I, as someone who's typically a bit more optimistic than most, am finding it harder and harder to be hopeful about the game's future when time and time again I see that Behavior's goals and priorities are all over the place. Behavior can say that they're focusing on quality of life, but it's been proven that their actions don't say nearly as much as their words do, and I don't know what to believe anymore. How am I, as someone who loves DBD and has poured hours upon hours into it, supposed to believe the game is headed in a better direction when, time and time again, Behavior has let me down in more ways than one? To be honest, I have no idea. Maybe I never will. Until then, that's it for me, gamers. Have a great day.